Morning to all of our listeners. It's another sunny day in Canberra, a little bit warmer than last week. Welcome to episode 4 of AI in Australia. Shaun, how are you doing?
Well, morning, almost afternoon. Morning, Tim. Yeah, it's a chilly morning still. A typical Melbourne takes about half a day to warm up, but we've almost hit double digits here, 10 degrees. But yeah, it's sunny. We've had a pretty downpour, a wet week so far. So the weekend's looking sunny. But yes, another busy week of the AI. It's almost literally AI everywhere is actually AI everywhere. When people are talking about it, the events are on. Last week was Gartner. This week I was at a Carlton in Business Leaders Lunch, which was about AI governance. So it seems everywhere we go, we're
Yeah.
talking AI, which is good because you want people to talk about it rather than just do it. You don't want to be a Nike of AI where you just do it. You actually want it to be responsible. You need to have training and lessons as we've been talking about. So yeah, super excited to talk about some of the things that I was involved in this week and same for you. So yeah, let's jump into it.
Yeah, wonderful. Great. And I think so important it's sort of this getting this balance right between how do we think and act and how do we get the pace right and make sure that we're doing things in a way that's responsible. And I think both of us have been spending a lot of time thinking about AI governance this week. It's very much in
Mm.
the kind of in the public zeitgeist at the moment. And I think we've said that we have asked that this is going to be the year of some big AI failures, and those will obviously be to some extent governance failures, and they'll be driven off the back of us responding, businesses responding to the hype and the pressure, the shareholder pressure, pre-IPO type of pressures to make sure that we've shown some really big wins. But I think what we'd like to talk to our audience about today is really going back to the business school books on how we identify opportunities, because we've spoken about this already, but the time to build has come down so dramatically.
Mm.
The distraction of the tooling, the fact that you can get things out into sort of minimum viable product phase, and the sexiness of all these code GPTs and what that means for prototyping can obscure business value and
Mm.
it can obscure governance. But before we get into that, so we'll take you, our audience, through kind of an opportunity identification framework and then a risk evaluation framework. We promised that, and we'll post that in the show notes as well. How do we assess opportunities, and how do we assess the risk associated with opportunities? But before we do that, what happened this week in Carlton in business? What were the leaders talking about? What was the narrative?
So it was actually really great to see a diversified group of organizations because say with a lot of you and I time, Tim, we're spending our time amongst financial services, which uh, good in terms of they're very innovative and they've got a lot of cash, so they're trying to do a lot of things, but bring it down to a bit more, let's say, mainstream. We had one of the big Australia's darlings, Canva. We all know who
Yeah,
Canva is, the big graphic design and very innovative. And then we had some of the big names, Penfolds, for those who know, we all know their wine, Fujitsu, some of the consulting companies, Ernst& Young, and then some of the football and sport like Carlton Football Club and other sports. So really sort of like a general view of industry. And it was really interesting to hear the discussion about people's understanding their concerns as well as innovation. So uh, if I look at so Canva was the sort of the main keynote speak, and if I looked at sort of the five key themes which they talked about, I want to sort of anchor on that because part of it is you don't want to just follow Canva because there's to me it's and I like your view, Tim, in terms of if we all follow this approach, what are the risks? Back to what we're about to talk about in the main topic, and to just don't follow what the leaders in the innovation are doing. So Canva's top of at the headline was on the topics, starting from the top, AI is accelerating Canva's mission. Number two, AI everywhere at Canva. Number three, how to implement responsible AI. Number four, why it matters for your business. And number five, tips for responsible adoption of AI. So a good balance, but at the second point, AI everywhere at Canva.
yeah,
Now that's something which you don't want to go racing into straight away when you say to your organization that hey, AI is everywhere. because of if you haven't got the guardrails, you haven't had people to trained up, and we know that AI, the different layers of the technology, the data, and then hence the culture and the shift. These are massive risks where it's like, almost like, hey, I'm going to just drive my car, but I haven't got a license, and I smash into somebody, some serious damage, and then rolling backwards to say, everybody, sorry, let's roll backwards, is a very almost too aggressive approach. So, but at least they, backed up with guardrails and strategy. But going out all out with AI everywhere, what's your view, Tim, in terms of, you know,
Yeah.
you want to have adoption, but is that going too far in terms of, hey, everybody, drop everything you're doing, just make sure AI is everything we're doing before
Yeah.
actually understanding the maturity of how ready are we to be AI everywhere? Like, what's your view of we got the
Well,
the carrot and the stick?
yeah, I mean, I think it reminds me a little bit of like the crypto bubble, where you had very ordinary bricks and mortar businesses suddenly just saying, sort of claiming that they were powered by crypto or powered by the blockchain. So I think you can't at the moment separate out a little bit of the media hyperbole from the reality on the ground. So AI everywhere, I suppose we just need to take it with a pinch of salt. I wonder what it really means.
Hmm.
But absolutely, in no instance is any business able to be AI everywhere. And it's not appropriate for everything either. So,
Yeah.
as we well know, there's certain parts of business, there's certain industries that are going to be disrupted first. And there's, Gartner talk about the complementarity and the exposure model. So, what are the jobs that are heavily exposed to AI and heavily complemented, and you're going to find things that have exposure and complementarity are going to be the areas that are going to be transformed first.
Yeah.
There are going to be certain areas in businesses that just aren't. There's no complementarity at all. Until humanoid robots are developed, some functions will still be will very much still be within the remit of humans. So, look, I think we need to take it probably with a pinch of salt. Like when they
Yeah.
say everywhere, they're probably signaling more to the markets that
Hmm.
they are early adopters. This is a pre-IPO business, so they want to make sure that they get in the right um, kind of media attention. And of course, we know that there's a bit of a market cap, let's call it like surcharge at the moment, or,
Hmm.
or boost from saying that you're AI ready and AI native. So
Yeah.
there's that. But then, secondly, to the heart of your question, we're really saying is it safe? Is it
Hmm.
safe to be AI everywhere? And I think the answer is it's probably not safe to be AI everywhere, unless, of course, you are an extremely mature business from a governance perspective already, and that would be those disciplines are things that aren't consequences of AI. They're organizational discipline that may or may not be there as part of your legacy anyway. So it would depend a lot on how this business has formed itself. But if we look at it in sort of its three broadest buckets from an AI governance perspective, the first that I think sometimes we don't appreciate the risk of is the fact that there's well, let me first tell you what those three are. You need to understand governance risk near model perspective first. That sits outside of your world to a large degree. That's the risk that is um, baked into the use of public LLMs. So the pioneer models of which we know the 7 or 8 or whatever they might be. So
Yeah.
the Geminis of the world, the Metas of the world, obviously the open AIs. Then you have your enterprise governance stack, and that's the stuff that's inside your domain, the stuff that you can kind of control. And then there's sort of the operational guardrails as you cascade it down into your business. But I think it's risky to say that you've got all of your bases covered because there's a lot that you don't control. There's a
Yeah.
lot that can go wrong at a pioneer model level. And you'll see that there's going to be a pushback in the next little while. You've seen it a bit already where there's a shift away, ironically, from cloud back to on-prem.
Yeah.
A
Exactly.
shift
Yeah.
out of cloud back to on-prem when it comes to models as well. So away from large language models back to small models that you can control, contain, and kind of de-risk. But yeah, Shaun, I think in short, without going down the governance rabbit hole in too much detail, I think it's a bold comment. I
Mm.
think it's probably a response to some media signaling rather than probably the realities on the ground. And absolutely
Yeah.
not. AI is not for everything and it's not everywhere. But I think it's more them trying to position to the market that they are, it's sort of at the top of the adoption curve.
Yeah.
What's your takeaway?
Yeah, I agree with you there, and you made a good point too about like learning, like, just step back, even one back, a back away from AI in terms of history teaches us a lot of lessons.
It does.
And I was heavily involved with in Europe when I was working for one of the banks in moving to the cloud, and I remember the quote profoundly when I was taught by our C level for one of the European banks is that we must race to the cloud. And I asked our head of architecture, what does that actually mean? What's our cloud strategy?
Yep.
And the quote, and this is I mentioned the name, but it was literally by the sea level, going to the hyperscaler's name, I'm not going to who it is, in Silicon Valley, and then choosing their use cases, and then whatever they bring back, we enable.
Yeah.
And which is almost like saying cloud everywhere. And so,
Yeah.
and it took us 12 months to get us the first bit of data on the cloud. So for being cloud everywhere to like, hey, we can't even get the guardrails stood up to even get our data protected and safe. So it's almost like it's now the same thing here as with AI in terms of, yes, you can be, it's not, I don't think it's very wise to say AI everywhere when there's a lot more complexity compared to cloud that nobody has even validated in terms of what is safe, how does it work between public and, as you say, like enterprise
That's right.
governance, and
Yeah.
and the dimensions that I don't even think that anybody can be AI native because these things in AI layers are evolving so fast. But
Yeah.
until they get tested, validated, and then they're saying, yep, it's safe, then we can go out and put it into production. So
Yeah.
I'm really concerned that companies are going to be like, hey, let's be AI, let's try and follow the leaders and be AI native and AI ready, but not actually really understanding what it means in terms of the operation model and the culture of the people to say, hey, go excited, adopt AI, experiment, when you haven't really understood, do we actually have the things in place, not just to be responsible and safe, but do we actually have the capability to do AI correctly that won't harm our customers or basically harm our brand when things do go wrong? And they will go wrong for sure.
The world. Look, I mean, saying that your AI everywhere is actually nothing sandwich. It doesn't mean anything. Like,
Yeah.
what does that mean? I mean, you aren't AI everywhere, and AI is not applicable everywhere. But I think it's an incredibly good segue to a big problem that the market's facing at the moment. So I'm going to share a slide with our audience here. Just have a look. I mean, I'm reminded of this history does repeat itself, and so do some of the business fundamentals. And
Yeah.
we mustn't forget the fact that opportunity identification is still right up and center of something that we need to be considering. So, Shaun, can you see my screen? Are you
Yep.
seeing?
Yep. I
Yeah.
can see
Well,
it. Yep.
so this is back to business school for many of us, but let's not forget the fact that any opportunity identification needs to have sufficiencies in three different domains. Okay. And those three different domains are the idea, and I think sometimes this is the one that's forgotten. It needs to be value adding. So why am I doing it? Not, I mean,
Yeah.
AI everywhere is not value adding. AI everywhere where makes the value proposition I've into my customer better, it makes my operations more efficient, or it reduces my risk.
Saving. Yeah.
That's good. But just for the sake of being everywhere is a terrible idea. And,
Yep.
what jumps to mind, and we'll go into this in a bit more detail, is Klarna. Klarna, the um, media headlines in 2024 were about getting rid of 700 support staff because they were going to AI everywhere. And then 2020, and they were going to save hundreds of millions of dollars, and their market cap was another pre-IPO story. And then 2025 comes along, and they kind of conceding they made a terrible mistake, and the
I was that.
fissure along which the fault line and where this occurred was on the customer front. Customers didn't want AI everywhere; they wanted to
Yeah.
speak to empathetic humans.
Yeah.
So value adding, and that's deeply profound, and it means, am I adding value to the customers? Then we'll just step through all of these things quickly, at the risk of sounding too didactic, but I'll be the lecturer today. Is it possible? Is it technically feasible?
Yeah.
Is Gen AI the right thing to do the job? Do we have sufficient quality data? Have we got the resources? Has my business got the people it needs to exercise these dreamed up AI opportunities? Is it value adding? We spoke about this. What pain point am I addressing? Is this something that gives me quantifiable ROI, makes my clients' lives better? Does it enhance workflows? Is it going to give me some sort of better user adoption? Those sorts of things. And then all of those possible and value adding to some extent are races to the bottom. So there might be first mover advantage, but is it defensible? This is something we also forget. Like, what is the secret sauce that I have as an organization? This is your
Mm.
realm, Shaun, data,
Yeah.
not just generic data, but proprietary data. What is the stuff that I have that nobody else has that I'm going to turn into assets that are going to create value for my customers? And I must be able to do them. And each one of these intersections of these Venns has got different profiles. So where it's possible and value adding, we know that we've got a client where there's a market need and it can be done. That's great. Problem is, If it's not defensible, everybody else can do it too.
Okay. Yeah.
At the intersection of value add and the defensible, it's great, but it might be such an outrageous idea that I can't do it. So we need to make sure that we've got organizational capacity as well. In the intersection of defensible and possible, and this I think is actually where most businesses are going wrong. They're saying, well, this is quite cool. It's something I can do and it's possible, but my customers don't want it. And
Yeah.
that's where you see another failing. But right in the middle, you have kind of what you really want,
Good
which
spot.
is I can build it, people need it, and others can't easily replicate it. So I think that's very profoundly important to get all three of those intersectionalities right.
And for
Yeah.
those of you who listen to it on Spotify or audio, the visual here that's Tim that's narrated, we'll have in the show notes, so you can come back to it if you listen to it. But it's a very simple and clear, but hugely important takeaway because of end of the like, if I look at it from that lens, and I like how you simplify that, Tim, because yeah, I'm coming from the data passion here that in my experience is with AI being different to all other like cloud and big data, and when we all had business intelligence, AI is a lot more intensive in terms of the technology that needs to be involved, the skills of people being trained up, and sort of the runway of to get it to AI just to be turned on, let alone for it to work. So if you haven't answered those questions that you just went through, Tim, people it's just almost like people like saying, "I'm going to train for the Olympics, but I don't know what event I'm going to be competing in." And when you get there, it's like, oh. Um, I've done 4 years of training, but then it's just like the competitors are so far better than me.
No product
You basically
market fit.
come and you finish last, and then all that 4 years is wasted. So you've got to be AI is very niche in terms of like those areas, particularly with the feasibility, the doability, and the biggest one that you and I have been talking about every week here in the podcast is value. Is
And
what is the value that you're trying to do
yeah.
for the effort that and which is a big effort, both cost and people, and the transformation of your talent and people, so that when you actually get to the end goal, and the end goal is never going to be like just the finish line, it's going to iterate, that you are getting some incremental value. Otherwise, this becomes this, as we call in data, just a sandbox, or you're doing theater use cases or adoption that doesn't do anything other than get people excited. But when people are like, great, how does this work in practice? They go, oh, we haven't worked it out yet. And then we don't know that. We all know that if you don't do things in production, then you're a cost center, but you're not generating any profit or revenue because it hasn't been in production.
So probably more meaningful now than ever before to remember your customers.
Yeah.
So because you think you've got a data advantage or sitting on something that's valuable and you can do it, does not mean you should. And I think that's the
Yeah.
mistakes that we've seen most often. So I've got data moats or whatever the other some clever piece of tech that nobody else has got, and I can do it, but I haven't answered the question of whether or not
Exactly.
there's a market need. So kind of closing that loop with the customers again
Yep.
this becomes unbelievably important. So, look, we can scale this idea a step further now and say, well, that gives me a generic opportunity identification framework. But if you sit in the C-suite, or maybe you're part of a governance committee somewhere in an enterprise, I hope you're not teaching you to suck eggs. But the next slide is almost more important. How do I then identify a use case?
Mm.
What are the considerations that I need to think about when now I've identified that there's I think generally defensible value adding and possible. Now what? Like, what are the next layers? So what we've done a bit of thinking about, Shaun and I, is to say, well, what are the key dimensions that should be considered? And you can build your own rubric, your own scorecard, but really you want to be thinking across 5 different dimensions, and each of those dimensions probably has subcategories. And you probably want to be embedding this layer of thinking on top of every smart idea that comes up from your team so that you've got some mechanism of culling, risk assessing, and then obviously putting onto your backlog and prioritizing. But business impact. So that's number one. What is the business impact? And you can see these will map back to the value adding component that we're talking about here. So what
Exactly.
is the financial ROI? What is the strategic alignment? Am I now building something that's got absolutely nothing to do with my core value proposition?
Yep.
Is this a pivot moment? Like, that's probably not strategically sound. You want to be expanding on the edges of where your customers see you as well. What will this do for my customer experience? Is this going to be a Klarna moment where you save on the payroll of 700 people, but then discover that your customers
Don't
leave
want it.
in
Yep.
troves because they don't want it?
Yep.
And how will this be market differentiating? So that's kind of your first of your five big pillars. And I mean, if you wanted to build a simple 100-point scorecard, you could just give each of these a 1 to 5 rating, obviously with sub-minima thresholds in it. So you probably want to fail anything that's too low. So
Yeah.
you're going to have category failures, and then you're going to have sort of overall scorecard failures. The second thing is feasibility. So that's talking about the art of the possible, which we've got here. So what are the components of possible? Well, they are data readiness. Can I do it? Do I have the data to perform hyper personalized customer journeys or build nudges, whatever it might be?
And this,
What is the
quickly on that
technical?
one, before you, that's, I just want to anchor on that one very quickly, Tim, because people, this is a huge part of data readiness is that do I have the data, but the huge factor that the research and a lot of the theme came out from the last 2 weeks with Gardner and the leaders is do I actually have the data managed in terms of governance, but also to actually the good quality and the right context.
Yep.
So we'll be talking later on about knowledge graphs in the chat, but managing context and managing good quality data throughout the life cycle of AI is super important. Just to touch on that, what does readiness of data mean? And
Well, it can't be done. It cannot be done unless you have that data
yep,
component
exactly.
completed.
And it's
And
a
it doesn't
showstopper.
mean that you can run many of these initiatives in parallel and you can make
Mm.
incremental gains. And I think the idea isn't big bang. The idea is to find, you're going to take sort of a volume and impact kind of approach to where you're going to prioritize your AI use cases, but you have to have the data.
Yep.
So this will give you a map on how to do technical complexity. This can talk about, um, the kind of again the art of the possible, but you may not have the skills, you may not have the
Mm.
people and the talent pooling and availability. The other thing is, although it may be possible, it may take you 10 years to build it. It's so technically difficult. So what is your time to value? So these are the components of feasibility. Risk and compliance. This is the one that's going to come home. These are the chickens that are
Mm.
coming home to roost in 2025, 2026. And this is because of the probabilistic nature of these models, the edge cases, the exploitation through all sorts of prompt engineering and injecting that we yet don't quite fully understand. But regulatory compliance. So there are things that are heavily regulated in the EU at the moment, which is probably where Australia is going to follow suit.
Yeah.
AI risk is really broken up into four categories, depending on the use cases, from high risk to sort of zero risk, and then the regulation flows according to those. We can delve into that at some point when people are struggling to sleep, but for now we'll skip over it.
Sorry, and jump on this 1 second because at the CIB lunch this week, this was a big talking point because of one of the speakers was from the National AI Centre. The question was asking where is our regulation here in Australia heading regarding sort of EU, which is very conservative, and then you've got US is a bit more liberal, and Australia is sort of in between. Just that people need to be super aware of the changes that are going to be happening in the space because of what's happening now may not be the same situation in 12 months. So if you think, great, I can do all these things, and the
Yeah.
regulators just rapidly just change and say, you can't do a lot of these things, you're going to have your value eroded by regulatory fines if you haven't said, oh, I wasn't aware of the changes. So this is a rapidly changing space of the regulation that the governments have highlighted that we're going to be watch this space. It's going to be changing rapidly. There's going to be a lot of guardrails, governance requirements, and just to say that I haven't caught up, isn't going to be a regulator's excuse for them to say that that's all right. Just have it done in 6 months' time. You're going to be hit pretty hard, as well as your brand's going to hit pretty hard as well.
So what you say, I completely agree with that. So ignorance of the law is never an excuse. But
Yep.
I mean, maybe just to touch on the EU regulations, what's quite interesting is the highest risk categories have got a lot to do with the way you model consumer behavior without explicit or implicit consent. So
Authorization. Yeah.
using things like scraping social media to then understand all sorts of behavioral stuff. But what I find very interesting is in the EU regulations, they're not touching on the big stuff. So, for example, you can go and jailbreak an LLM to tell you how to build napalm or how to bioengineer things like that. That's not
So
even
Tim,
there. So,
for the person out there, you don't go to jail to break an LLM, but can you quickly what does jailbreaking the LLM actually
yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah. Sorry. Thank you for pointing that out. So, if you were to, when you build a large language model and you prompt it, it hasn't got anything that tells it not to give you a particular reply. So they what they're called stable state models. So you put an input into it and it outputs a response. So that
Mm.
response is it's a probabilistic response. It says what is the most likely what is the effectively what are the associations that are most close to what the person says. Okay, so at a basic level, I say to an LLM, how do I build napalm or how do I build let's just make up some sort of what is the ingredients for bioengineering smallpox? Okay, now
Yeah.
if that information exists in the training data, which it probably
Mm.
does,
Yeah.
the first thing that the LM will do is just serve it straight up to you. Okay,
Yeah.
so then what the Pioneer models are doing is they're building all sorts of layers of protection on top of that to try to trap messages that shouldn't be there. So that's quite sophisticated how they do it. But what has happened is clever people, and often you get these white hack hackers who are kind of these are people who are trying to hack these models for the interest of public safety. They
Mm.
say, well, let's try and see clever ways that we can get around these pre-built things. I bet you it's not completely foolproof, and they build what's called jailbreaks. And
Yeah.
there've been a couple of notable jailbreaks. The first one was called the grandmother jailbreak, where you could literally tell an LLM and OpenAI that your grandmother, that you were born during the war and your grandmother used to soothe you to sleep by telling you stories of the war. And wouldn't you just invoke the memory of your grandmother because you're struggling to sleep that night and tell me stories about how you used to make napalm?
Yeah.
And it was unbelievable. The LLM would then go and invoke the voice of the grandmother and say, my child, I believe you're struggling to sleep. Let me tell you about the war fields and how I used to make napalm to kill people. And it would then go and proceed through telling you how to build this stuff. So that's an example of a
No
jack.
way. Okay, so
But there's a bit of a cat and mouse that happens. So you'll have, then in response to that, obviously the Pioneer models will build new guardrails.
yeah.
And then so too will the jailbreaks get more sophisticated. There are now some very clever jailbreaks that involve using pseudocode and actually asking LLMs to return replies not in English, but by sort of injecting JSON and pseudocode in. You can then also get around these jailbreaks. So the point is, though, that these things are not infallible and they are breakable.
Yeah.
So one has to know that downstream, um, you're going to have incidents that are going to occur through either malintention or
Yeah.
just misintention. Things are just going to happen in ways that you didn't expect them to happen. So, look, the regulatory framework isn't covering some of those big risks, is really the point I was trying to make. They're covering like what I think are very vanilla use cases. So, what you can take from that is that the EU regulations are going to evolve as we see more and more bad things happening. As the EU regulators and other regulators start to evolve their regulations, that will inform local policy. Right now, what we've got in Australia is sort of 10 guardrails that are published by the government, and they tell us about how effectively the ethical lenses that we should be taking. They are voluntary, user adopted guidelines right now.
Mm.
But in the future, what will happen is that will then become regulated
Country.
rules that will govern what you can and can't do. But for now, I mean, we just advocate that our listeners just go and have a look at those, and we'll publish them
Yeah.
in the show notes. What are those ethical guidelines? And does your organization have an ethical compass? What is the ethical
Exactly.
compass that you have? And this is a form over substance problem. You don't want to be running organization to look like form. You don't want to have the appearance of governance. What you want to have is the substance, and the substance derives from ethics. So
Mm.
if you've got the right ethics in your business and you understand what the ethical hallmark North Stars are, then all of your procedures and your operationalization can flow from the ethical principles. Okay, so halfway through the lecture, we've gotten through ethics and reputational risk. The next thing is obviously data privacy and model risk. So model risk is everything around your model gardens. That's another deep dive we'll do at some point. But most organizations have got more than one model, and those models can be everything from LLMs to machine learning models to all sorts of things. They exist inside hyperscalers. Sometimes they exist natively. What are they? How are they? How is the data encrypted, obfuscated? What do you ensure? What goes into the models? What goes out of the models? What goes into the hyperscaler? What stays inside your local data tenancy? And how do we regulate all of those different risks? That's hugely important. It's a bigger
Yeah.
subset as well of risk and compliance. And then this AIX or AI explainability.
Mm.
How do we know what the things did?
Exactly.
We gave it an input, it gave us an output. Is it just a obscure black box and we've got no idea how it spat out the result, or can we deconstruct it? It's explainable AI is a very important
And this is
component.
and just to jump on that one too, AI explainability isn't the same as AI governance. So, hence, like even before AI, when we used to do model reviews for the banks in Europe, this is before some of the data science used to do some really cool, amazing stuff. Unless they could explain how does this machine model work, so that when things could this potentially harm our customers, or if anything, too, like hey, it's going to make us a lot of money for our organization, but is it at the expense of the customer in a perceived negative way? This is sort of the offensive side in terms of this is great, but let's make sure we know what this can do on a positive, negative side, which is separate from governance in terms of putting more of the guardrails and saying that, how does this be protected in terms of an overall perspective. So don't mix up the explainability and the governance for these people.
100% right. And when it comes to explainability, RAG on its own is not going to cut it.
Yeah,
We'll talk about that in the future, but you need to have things which govern relationships, things like graphs and other things we'll talk about in more detail. Then another really important one, so agentic fit and innovation. This is it value adding again? So do I actually need an LLM or am I just
mhm,
building it or an agent? Is it just because everybody's talking about them that I'm
yeah,
going to
yeah,
build it? Is it required? Do I have the tools in the API ecosystem? Can I give an agent without access just becomes a customer frustration? It says, how can I help you today? And you say, please, can I update my details? And it says, sorry, I can't do that. And then you want to shoot it in the
yeah.
screen. So you've got to make sure it's got access to the API ecosystem. Does it need memory and reasoning? And if it does, that might then create a candidate for it. And then what about adaptability? Does this agent learn from customer? Does it expand the context window or the user history so that next time I engage with it, it's better than the last time? That's quite an important determinant of agentic fit. And then probably the most
Big one.
underplayed one to some extent is organizational readiness. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say this is where most businesses are going to fail. The technology is evolving faster than and exceeding organizational capabilities in
Yeah.
almost all instances. And this starts at the top, executive sponsorship cascading down. Then you've got change management maturity. How does the organization adapt to change? Is it able to? Is it federated? How
Mm.
does process integration readiness work? And kind of what are the organizational governance models?
Just on that one, Tim, like people, I can hear right now people, especially up top, going, rolling the eyes. Here we go, yeah, organizational, yeah, change management, exit sponsorship.
Yes, yes,
Uh, and in the past, you go, yeah, yeah, but from experience, having run inundated data programs for over 10 years, the number one reason for those that have failed and the one that have succeed is always, and I'm now being factual about, especially for some big organizations in Europe, has always come down to it. Those who have the greatest executive leadership and
yep,
those who have the strongest change management communication and the cultural change in line with what you just talked about are the ones who succeed, and the ones who underestimate or even say like we'll sort out the change com later on, and the leaders go, hey, I don't understand the data, but just run with it. These are the ones who they either fail or take twice as long. So I don't want to underestimate just how important that is in today's space of this AI. That if you don't have these in place, forget your tech, forget your like the money that you have, and forget that. Let's just be AI ready, because this is going to be the foundation of getting that right or wrong.
and we'll deep dive this. And I agree
Mm.
with you 100%. And I think we've said it before, the businesses that will succeed here are not necessarily the businesses that are the best technocrats. You can
Yep.
bring those skills in.
Yep.
They are the businesses that have shown incredible resilience and abilities to pivot when other tectonic plates have moved. So
Exactly.
when there's a shock to an organization, is your business a dinosaur or is it nimble and agile? Some of the businesses that have implemented scaled agile frameworks for enterprise, things like that, safe as it's sometimes known, you're going to find that those businesses that are able to adjust quickly are going to be the ones that look like they're AI progressive again, like they've adapted to other big changes before as well.
Yeah.
And one of the key dimensions here is, I mean, there are two. The one is organizational education. So giving people the space in the business to be able to understand the stuff. People don't do things they don't understand.
Yeah.
At the moment, there's just like runaway hyperbole around AI. It's starting to get intimidating.
Mm.
It's starting to feel like everyone's doing it and we're not. It's not
Yeah.
true, but that's
Yeah.
what it's
Exactly.
feeling like.
Yeah.
You've got to get your teams to understand the stuff from an executive right down, from the board all the way down to the operational teams. And the second thing is you have to make sure that you're measuring this and incentivizing the teams in ways that matter. So we've been on the KPIs, the OKR, bandwidth, all those things, but all it comes down to in basic terms, do you create the space and the authority for teams to do this kind of transformation, or are they too busy doing everything else
Yeah.
that they're
Exactly.
not going to ever have the time to adapt? And if you don't get that right, you're not going to manage this change either.
And I think just on that one too, like hence with again with both you and I, Tim, spending most of our time building up training, but also doing training in the past. When people who don't have time to do the training and think I'll do it later on and just watch a YouTube video of like a crash course on the weekends, or who can scrape LinkedIn and think, yep, now I know the buzzwords,
Yeah.
that will nowhere even get you close to 5% of actually getting this ready to execute on your organization. So because this is and having worked in data for over 20 years, this is the biggest shift I've ever seen in types of new tooling, new architecture, and new capabilities. If you don't have your organization to learn and have the time to learn this new shift, they will not be able to execute for you. And if anything, it actually could do more harm in terms of the risks and the failures have become more regular because of people say, "Oh, I don't know how this works." So finding the time to educate your people and to training them properly, not by saying that, "Hi, look, have a day off and just do a crash course." This is not something you do a crash course. You need to learn the fundamentals and have everybody from your business, your technology, and your architecture team have this common consistency, common language that you connect end to end. Otherwise, you're going to have
100%
pieces where
right.
it's black box.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think probably the most dangerous type of leader at the moment is going to be the headline reader who
Yeah.
jumps onto LinkedIn. And I mean, I actually find myself getting so impatient this week. I'm just reading the hyperbole. I saw a post from, I mean, I won't quote the institution, but 6 million followers on LinkedIn. And the quote read something like, businesses today are reaching $100 million in annual recurring revenues in 12 months with teams of less than 20 people by leveraging AI. That's what it read.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just like clickbait,
Clickbait. Yeah.
quite
Yeah.
frankly. I know of one, and I challenged the author, I never got a reply. I know of one company in the history of any company ever that's done that. And right now, that's Cursor, right? There's
Mm.
one. That
Yeah.
is not companies. That's one
Like
outlier.
an outlier.
And
Exactly.
perhaps that data point is going to be predictive of things to come. But right now, if you read that and you think that that's what's going on in the world, and you take that back to your leadership teams, you're going to create anxiety and chaos.
Yeah.
Like the
Exactly.
reality is that that's not what's going on. It might be an indicator, early indicator of where we might get to, a promise of the future.
Yeah.
I think the leader, as you say, and who reads the headlines and doesn't take the time to understand the detail of the art of the possible in their business and the limitations of the tech and the application of the tech, that's going to be a very
Yeah.
dangerous beast, very dangerous beast. So I just want to wrap up what we've said. It's been a pretty technical lecture from
Masterclass.
Dr. Tim and Dr. Shaun, your lecturers today. But the way that you could culminate a rubric like this, a scorecard like this, is to score it. And I know this might sound a bit simplistic, but you've got your key dimensions we've shown here: business impact, feasibility, risk and compliance, agentic fit, and organization already. Then some secondary metrics. If they were all equally weighted, you'd have a 100-point scorecard. And then you would say in your organization, every time you look at a use case, anything above 85, we're going to fast track. Anything between 70 and 84, we're going to assess further because it's obviously failing in some of the dimensions. Anything that scores a 2 or below in any dimension is a hard fail. You may have fantastic value adding features, fantastic defensibility, but you cannot build it. It is not, you do not have the time to value. That must fail.
Mm.
That must get off your backlog. Then at least you're going to be able to surface with some sort of rationale how you assess which use cases in the organization. Then you put it onto a backlog and you can kind of go a bit deeper. But have a lens like this. That's the point. If you don't have some sort of scoring rubric that's well thought out and some sort of method of prioritization, you're going to end up in the really dangerous space of just having the loudest leaders and business sponsors who are most agitated, advocating for the use cases, and you could end
Yeah.
up with massive failures. And this should cut all the way up to the CEO. Even the CEO should be able to defend the use case.
Yeah. Yeah. And also too, I just want to leave with that one too. At the common catchphrase that I'm hearing with leaders across the organizations that we're dealing with, both here in Australia, but also too in Europe, where some of our clients are, is that if we don't, act now, we're going to be left behind with this AI train. So there's a huge rush of terms of like the others, like by reading, as you said, Tim, they read these LinkedIn bait, and also too they hear about be in the papers that the look the growth and the companies are with AI. That then they go, well, I must do it because we're being left behind. That actually isn't true. Like these are such small outliers that if you're trying to if your barometer is what you read in the media and LinkedIn about okay, we need to move faster and cut corners. If anything, you're going to get backwards. So that's I suppose for us in terms of we're facing reality. Most organizations, big and leading, are still struggling in terms of what does AI mean for us? Do we have the right people? Do we train them up? And we need to get the things in place like anything else, roadmap, capabilities, and the change management. So please, whatever you do, don't just panic and rush and then think of and react with the latest news story because a lot of it is there is fiction or it's there to create news stories rather than a genuine call to action.
100% right. And the bigger the organization, the more that's true. You don't
Yeah.
change massive organizations quickly, no matter what the catalyst is.
Yeah.
Those systems are complex, they have inertia in them, and they need to be moved strategically
Yeah.
in a thought out way. I think what we'll discuss next week, because it flows really well from this, is now that we've given you a lens to identify opportunities and a lens to assess those opportunities from a scoring point of view, how do we create a two by two that potentially looks at individual use cases inside a business to say, how do I prioritize volume and value? So
Mm.
we'll take a classic management consulting example. Perhaps we'll use a bank or some other as an example and say, right, now I've got some basic way of determining some of the signal from the noise. Now, how do I prioritize? Now they've got that backlog. So is it
Yeah.
volume? Is it impact? And how do I take that next lens? And really what we're building out here is a sciencey approach to how we move from the hyperbole to the action inside the business.
And
But
that
it's
prioritization is super important. I remember like again back to the cloud, the last cloud sort of movement, which is sort of pre-AI, is that when we were with this cloud company, they asked us to go to the cross organization or come up with like 10 use cases each. And we spent a whole day with each business leader and we had over 100 use cases. And then the company, the cloud company says, okay, which use case do you want to do? And then we said, all of us, we spent the whole day fighting over which use case was more important. So without having a clear prioritization, you're
exactly right.
basically going to be like, mine's more important than yours, and then you become gridlock. So
Yep.
the
Yep.
importance of having this clarity around how you're going to prioritize a use case on the right metrics and actually have like a way of getting your organization to be around it is really critical. So looking forward to next week's deep dive with the deep dive with the doctors, as I suppose they call it, but in a fun way because of as I said to people, if you don't learn this stuff, we don't want you to get it from the wrong people who are just telling you selling you rubbish to try to get their followers up or trying to like sell something. Tim and I are purely there to give you education. We're not salespeople trying to flog something to get our Instagram followers or LinkedIn followers up to a magic number. We're more about transferring knowledge. So please listen wisely and not be like a flippant swipe and what do you call it? Swipe and I don't follow social media that much, but
Yeah.
swipe
It's
and
the
swish and other type of things that I don't know.
yeah.
You need to have patience and listen rather than just be impatient and just flow with the wind.
So it's been great to chat, and it's been a good blue day for the blue shirts. And we hope you have wonderful weekends. And we
And
look forward.
Tim, don't. It's actually a blue day and a dark day because my football team, the Blues, speaking of Blues, got absolutely smashed last night in the AFL in Adelaide. And it's a frustrating instead for all you blue supporters. Yeah, dude, maybe we need some AI to help us get back on the winning list because it's not a happy time at the moment at Carlton. So let's hope that, on a positive note, that some of the intelligence moves into the AFL Blues, that we see some light at the end of the tunnel because it's not good at the moment. We're losing by long margins and there's a lot of frustrated supporters that we see in the media. So please don't go crazy.
Well,
Patience.
I hope you manage to recover. Maybe you can geek out on some cool AI in the
I
weekend
know
to make it.
exactly,
But
exactly. Hope so.
nice to chat,
You
and
too, Jim. Enjoy the weekend.
good, and
Have
we'll,
have some time to chill out and yeah, don't get too caught up in the AI circus. And we can looking forward to next week's pod.
yeah, fantastic. Thanks.
Sounds
Okay.
good.